I look back over recent years and I see, what do I see? More than anything else, there's been a transformation of science and reason based on open-mindedness and free thinking into inflexible dogma. And I find that deeply troubling. And I feel at this turn, this beginning of a new year, it's yet another inducement, another moment when we ought to pause and think, is this really how we want to be? And isn't there a better way of doing things? Aren't there better ways of doing things? It feels to me as though a dominant movement within the scientific community. So it's not science in its entirety, because those who live truly the scientific way are open-minded at all times and sceptical and aware that the next great idea could come from the most unexpected source, open to the idea that all ideas are up for challenge all the time, that there's always more to learn and more to know. So I'm not saying this about the world of those who follow the scientific method, but within science there's a movement within that world has become dominant, and it feels as though its practitioners have finally lost patience with us, the general population, and that rather than being, as they're supposed to be, open to discussion, and bearing in mind that there's always more to know, and that we don't know where the next inspiration will come from, it feels like domineering entities have decided to close the book on debate and dissent, and instead they just want to lay down the law. And so what I say, my message for the new year, at this turn of the new year, is that it's a good time to think about all of this, and what we need is a renaissance. I say what we need is a renaissance. Now that's a familiar word for most people. A lot of people tie it to Italy. A lot of people put it around maybe from 1400, 1500, 1600, that kind of, spanning across those centuries. But really, if you look into it at all, the last Renaissance probably, or at least perhaps, began as early as the time of Charlemagne, right back in the 8th and 9th centuries AD. Because by the time of Charlemagne, and in the world of Charlemagne, although not exclusively, but in his world, for example, there was renewed interest in the classical world. The world of Charlemagne was aware of Rome and aware of classical Greece, and in his time there was reading of and translation of ancient texts. People were looking back at the wisdom that had been acquired by the Greek philosophers and others. And once inspired, once that little spark had been struck, once that little flame had been kindled, then that desire for knowledge and better understanding, based on what had been already understood and known in the past, it continued for centuries. Having come into being in the 800s and the 900s, it just kept on coming, and by the 12th century, which is early, really, for most people when thinking about the advent of the Renaissance, but already by the 12th century, that mood to look back in order to better look forward was well entrenched, and it was all about translating and reading of Greek philosophy and Greek science, well, if you can call Greek approaches to understanding the world science. The Crusades were critical at this time, because the Crusades brought Europeans into contact with the Middle East, into those, really, to be honest, those far more advanced civilizations at that time. Where Islamic scholars had been hard at it, translating and rediscovering the work of the ancient Greeks and others. And the Crusaders, after they spent time out in that part of the world, they came back to Europe with, amongst other things, some of that knowledge, having been reawoken to that ancient wisdom. And the process was ongoing, it was constant. The fall of Byzantium, when Constantinople fell to the Seljuk Turks in 1453, a lot of Christian thinkers there, Christian thinkers in the East, fled into the West for their lives and also for freedoms of all sorts. And they brought that ancient wisdom with them as well. That was another exodus from the East into the West. And then the Black Death made a huge impact, and according to some writers, was part of setting the stage for that main Renaissance that everybody's familiar with, because so many prominent officials, prominent people died along with everybody else, that there was enormous social and political upheaval at all levels, from the grassroots right up to the top. The plague was not a respecter of any part of the demographic, and so there were hitherto unexpected opportunities created. An edifice of dominant people was cracked and fractured and fell away, and it allowed different green shoots to come through, and it created opportunities. The Medici family in Florence, they came through in the wake of the plague. They got their chance by that winnowing, that harrowing of the population. It enabled that family to come through, and they produced political leaders and 4 popes. You've got the development of the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg, 1440, 1450, there or thereabouts, provides the technology that enables the circulation of information. It's the internet of its day. Suddenly information that had depended upon manuscript, people copying out books by hand, which takes forever and is very expensive. The advent of the printing press meant that Bibles, first of all, and then books and pamphlets and leaflets of all kinds could be circulated, putting information into the hands of people who hitherto and otherwise would have been cut off from those sources. That kind of revolution we're seeing again now, and we have been seeing since the advent of the internet, because it has given people access to information, and it has connected people in ways that would not have been possible. And here's where we get to, I think, possibly the heart of the matter. If you think about Renaissance humanism, it was a response to the sort of calcified, ossified, fossilised nature of the church's control over society. Renaissance humanism was about wanting to put human nature at the centre. It was wanting to create opportunities for human beings, and it was about they weren't the Renaissance humanism. It wasn't against religion, but it was looking back at the classical Greek and Roman texts, but it was about doing that in a way to alter, to shift contemporary thinking, and to bring forth a new mindset. And those who were reading the ancient texts perceived within those texts a focusing on human decisions and human actions rather than the following of Christian dogma. It was about putting the welfare of the human being, the natural human animal, at the centre of everything, and trying to put everything within humanity's grasp rather than waiting on some transcendent deity and obedience to that transcendent deity to make all the difference. And so a lot of those Renaissance humanists, those who were developing that philosophy, they remained religious, but they believed that it was our obligation, our responsibility to make the most of ourselves. And so it was a whole Renaissance humanism was a way of thinking that put humanity and the potential of humanity and prioritised the opportunities for humanity above all else. And I think, for what it's worth, that we have seriously and dangerously lost that essential human element. I believe as well that inevitably societies and civilizations go wrong. If they last long enough, eventually they take a wrong turn. They become fixed and inflexible because of a dominant point of view. And we are there now. And I say that we need to refresh our civilization. And I say that requires, in part at least, a renaissance. A looking back at what underpinned the last renaissance, which is the realisation that humanity and the well-being of humanity should be at the heart of it. We've got to a point now, and what I see coming down the line is a world in which humans serve machines rather than machines serving humans. I'm deeply troubled by the idea of transhumanism, which seems to suggest that what's required is an upgrade of the human animal by merging us with technology, physically merging us with machinery to somehow bring us up to scratch. And I think that is a fundamental, egregious, dangerous wrong. I think advancing technology should be about making the best of the human animal, yes, but without blending us with technology. There's a story that's worth remembering. When the internet was just being kindled into existence, when it was just coming, one of the figures was Doug Engelbart. He thought of the internet before the internet existed, and he strove to bring it together from the technology that was available to him. And he believed that his objective was to make humans better with technology. But it wasn't about physically blending them. It was about exploiting technology to make the most of human potential. And he ran across, and there was a famous interaction between him and Marvin Minsky, who was at MIT. Marvin Minsky was one of the founding fathers of AI, artificial intelligence. And there's a recording of a conversation, an interaction going on between the two men, where Minsky goes on and on, waxes lyrical about endowing computers, as they were understood at the time, endowing computers with reason and with with an intelligence that would make them the rival of, and then the superior to, the human animal. And Engelbart interrupted him and said, "You're going to do all that for computers. What are you going to do for the people?" I think we need to ask that question again. What are you going to do for the people, and when are you going to do it for the people? That's the renaissance that I think we need. I think we need to reset, by which I mean we need to remember that the humanity is supposed to be at the centre of our objectives. We've drifted too far towards making populations slaves to technology, when technology should be the slave to the people. I think we need to be reborn in this time of change with a refreshed understanding of what it means to be human and alive.